Hi everyone, this is Casey. I wanted to share a quick reminder that enrollment is now open for the next cohort of my signature Paradigm Shift program. This is the program where I personally coach you through taking action with the essential skills and mindsets you need to support your PDA child or teen and make true progress. After every cohort, I ask parents for feedback, and what they say over and over again is that the program is life-changing. It empowered them to transform their relationship with their child and stabilize their home. You can use the link in the show notes to learn more, join the program interest list, or dive right in and enroll for immediate access. Now, on to today's show. Hi, and welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision making as a parent of a demand avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of the At Peace Parents podcast. I am here with Aoife, an Irish woman living in Australia and mother to 3 PDA children, one suspected PDA, 2 confirmed. She has a 15-year-old PDA daughter, an 11-year-old PDAer, and a 7-year-old suspected PDAer, but with a little bit different flavor of neurospiciness thrown in, her words. And Aoife identifies as PDA autistic herself, and she is an alumna from the Paradigm Shift program. So we are checking in and learning more from her story. So welcome, Aoife. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me, Casey. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy too. So, Aoife, I would love to start off by knowing a little bit more about your parenting experience before you learned about PDA.
Yeah, so my parenting journey was challenging, to say the least. So I would say probably really beginning with birth. So my first child, when she was born, she was an extremely difficult baby. She seemed to be permanently upset. She just cried and cried and cried. She wouldn't feed. She fought with me. And I remember really when she was a baby, I wore her in a sling. She didn't sleep. I just slept with her on my chest, whenever I could lie down, and that could be 2 hours a night. And what I found was, as she got a little bit bigger, if I rotated her so that she faced the world and wasn't facing my chest, she was a little calmer. And one of the things that played back to me when it was working through the Paradigm Shift program, an example Casey used of you bouncing your son on the trampoline. This was my experience with my baby, because I sort of bounced, like I sort of just bounced and danced and bounced and danced.
Yeah.
Helped with the intensity and duration of the screaming. So, and that was my experience in the first year of my daughter's life. And I did go to specialists, going, there's something wrong. She would go through odd periods where she wouldn't toilet, like for 14 days she wouldn't go to the toilet, and
Oh, wow.
all kinds of and she just felt like something was wrong, like she was screaming and screaming, and it felt like she was terrified, like she was about to die, and I couldn't work out what was wrong. But when we would go and see a doctor or a specialist, she would go silent, very quiet. No, and I would be like, no, she never stops crying. She never sleeps. And they're like, well, babies cry, and that was kind of the feedback I got. I was a young mum, I was 25, and I eventually got to a point where I felt like I can't get help for her. Or maybe I'm just a bad mother. Like I just don't know what I'm doing here. That I can't settle my child. And she did, after about a year and a half of kind of rocking her. Things got a little better, but her development was always really spiky and quite a little bit different. Not that I had anything to compare it with, in that when she learned to walk, she just wouldn't try. Like, she just held herself on the edge of things and looked. And then one day, a little bit later, but not much later than typical timeline, she walked across the floor. And this is how she learned absolutely everything. She would not move or try, and then would kind of observe, and then one day she would do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was kind of different. And I would go to parent groups and go, all these other children look really calm. And they're not like, the parents don't look like they're like dancing on their head to keep the child in a space of calmness, which is how it kind of felt to me. Like, I almost had to just dance. And as she got less intense, like post the baby phase, so sort of at around 18 months, I think it had been such a difficult journey that I automatically scaffolded. So I went into, when we would go to play group, I would immediately try to get to know all the other mums, arrange play dates with their kids at my house, because it was much easier having two children at my house than having one, because the other kids were special interest. So I didn't have to be the
Yes, I remember that.
nervous system accommodation. And I didn't understand, because I remember having other kids to my house, and other kids loved coming to our house because I'd have finger painting set up and a whole range of things, because I knew if I didn't set up an activity very quickly, she would dysregulate. So there had to be something, and I would be involved in the play. And other kids thought our house was great because I always had these major activities and was kind of in the play with the kids. To support her. And I had the experience as a PDA child of finding it very difficult to make friends, and I was probably quite a controlling playmate. So I had a lot of friendship trouble. So I think that had also set me up to really try and support her and scaffold her to have access to friends, because I could see in the play that she could be kind of controlling, and that she would also roll off into tears so easily, which the friends that she was with could then get frustrated that every game ended in tears within a few minutes. So I very much scaffolded that, which was simple when she was little. When she was 4, I had my second child, and it wasn't coincidental that I waited a while.
Yep, I have 4 years between my kids too.
Because it was a journey and a difficult one. And there was lots of things that probably helped support her when she was little. Like, I didn't put her in a big childcare center because I knew she couldn't handle that. And I found a family daycarer who was lovely and minded 2 other boys who were a similar age to her, but one of them didn't have a mum who was present, and the other one had sort of funny family circumstances. So she was the boss in that universe and was very regulated by it, right? They'd sort of cede to her, these 2 quiet little boys, and the minder had some other had loads of animals. So she would just follow the cats and the dogs and the ferret and different things around the house. And it was quite good space. And I particularly picked this minder because she was just very loving, right? So she just, she was kind of flexible, very crafty. The house was always full of like glitter, and she didn't care. And there was glitter strewn across the floor, lots of animals, and 2 other little kids who sort of so I feel like in that early phase, she had some of these baked in accommodations, which also were really useful for me, because I remember my husband coming home and going, but you don't understand what it's like trying to be the emotions for somebody else. Because I always intrinsically felt that, like, I was like, this is exhausting. Like, I have to manage, like, if I feel anything, she will feel it and then escalate, right? So if I feel upset at all, then she's going to be in tears and screaming on the floor. So, I have to be managing her emotions all day. That's what it felt like. And I
Yeah.
say the word emotions because that's what it felt like to me then. Now I sort of see it differently. But at the time, I was like, you're kind of like these emotional lungs for your child. And I was like, how do other parents do this?
Yeah.
This is incredibly
I
difficult.
sustain this over a lifetime.
Yeah. So I guess those are probably that's probably how it was when she was little. I had a second child. There was various stages. When her sister was born, her sister was very quiet. So she was kind of an opposite as a baby. She kind of was like almost like an opposite to the eldest in that she was a very quiet, very passive baby, I would say. But when she hit about one or two, she was just a runner, a climber, and she was physically very difficult to keep alive. But she didn't really like she spoke a few words, but never really talked much until she hit about four. So while she was just this physical follow around and, would open doors and run out the door or climb up a tree, she didn't dysregulate her sister so much. It was probably more they when her sister hit eight and she started talking with a vengeance. And when my second child started talking, she started info dumping. So she would start at 7 in the morning and talk without a break until 8 o'clock at night, following me around. And it was probably at that stage that my then 8-year-old daughter went into a bit of a burnout phase, the first burnout we saw, which involved a lot of screaming meltdowns, attempts to run away. And I think what happened at that stage was from what had been just intuitively a very accommodating parenting style. And at this stage, I had just had my third kid. So we had just gone third kid, second kid has started talking, which I actually think is the thing that really dysregulated my daughter.
Yeah, yeah.
And then my eldest was having these screaming meltdowns and trying to run away and all the things. And I think my parenting, just what happened to me was I kind of went, oh my God, I was always giving her like 100% of my attention. And now she can't cope because she's not getting it. I have to find that 100% of attention while giving it to the other kids as well.
Yeah.
And so to me, it just felt like, oh, it's my fault. I'm not giving her. And I'd always sensed she needed, like, even when she was little, I worried that as a teenager, I'm going to have mental health problems here because she was just so black on things. Like every day she would leave school and she would walk out of school looking like she was a happy, typical kid with the other children. She'd get into the car and it would just be like, it was terrible. Everything was awful. Like
Yeah.
tears, crying, but like I'd go to the teachers going, she's anxious, she's upset. And I knew that she was hiding in the bathrooms and stuff in school, but they would say, yeah, she's really smart. And I was like, she's fine. And I was like, I really don't think so. Because that wasn't what I was getting. Tears in the car, cry all the way home, probably some meltdowns in the evening, equalizing behavior with her sister. So what started to happen was that real pattern of she couldn't look at her sister without saying something mean. So I'd say she withdrew into herself at that age. Meanwhile, her little sister had turned into info dump central and there started being a lot of equalizing. So it felt like you couldn't have, well, pretty much for the whole of my journey with my children, it feels very difficult to have my children in the same room as each other
Yeah.
because there will be a fight, like within 5 to 10 minutes, unless I'm actively in the play in the middle between any two kids that could potentially play, it will turn aggressive very quickly. And that's kind of the pattern. And then I guess at the age we had, so COVID hit when my daughter was 9 going on 10, my eldest. And that's really when the wheels fell off. So there was no longer any of the other accommodations that I brought in from the outside to help. So she was no longer going to this beautiful childcare, which gave me a regulation break, and I'd work, and then I would be really regulated and ready to be super attentive and fully engaged with my children when they were with me. She no longer had the co-regulation of some of the friends. So she's very socially motivated, and the friends that she could interact with were very regulating. And she had one particular friend who was just a very calm energy, who kind of seemed to be an intense regulator for her. And I know because I used to bring her to the household.
Yeah.
She's not doing well. Can you come and have a hangout? I'll bring you guys to a trampoline place. I'll bring you guys here. So I was always, off in the car, and all these things that I would do, like the novelty, the dopamine. We're going somewhere new. We're going to go to the trampoline place. We're going to go to, there's like a new park open somewhere. We're going there. We're going, which was the things I had used when she was young to regulate her, which were really sensory intense, dopamine, novelty. Let's get out of the house. Let's find something new that we haven't been at. Let's move your body. Like she's doing gymnastics. She cartwheeled up and down the house for years. She was on her hands more than she was on her feet.
Yeah.
But in COVID, all of this stopped. And very quickly, I was seeing this escalating, and I could just feel anxiety. And she was very silent at this point, but just I could feel how anxious she was. And I felt like it was getting worse and worse. And I went and sought medical support, a psych support, but there was none because it was COVID. And we got on a waiting list because apparently the services were really stretched, and a waiting list that we never got to the end of. And by the time we got to the end of the waiting list, before we ever got to the end of the waiting list, we'd had, some significant suicidal type issues starting to develop, and an eating disorder. Yeah. And so she had stopped eating altogether. Probably relevant to the pattern is that we probably had always had restrictive eating patterns, and she was very small. So she was under the 50th percentile height. But I think when she was young, I had brought her to doctors and, had been told, no, they'll never starve themselves. So eventually that's just what I went with. I was like, well, she's not starving herself. But one of the things that happened, and when she had her eating disorder and she was refed in hospital context, was that she grew to the 50th percentile height. So probably those restrictive eating patterns were always there, but they just intensified dramatically in that burnout that was maybe precipitated by COVID. And in the meantime, I guess my other kids were also having their own struggles. So my 11-year-old, actually at that time, she would have been about 7 or 8, 7. So she's 4 years younger than her sister. So her sister was 11, she was 7. And she, hated school, was sick in school all the time, and had also by the GP at this point been referred for psych assessment. She wasn't socially motivated in the same way that her sister was, and oddly, very socially capable. So other kids would like her, but she just found it very overwhelming and would try to avoid if there was a party, wouldn't want to go, definitely didn't want to be in school, and certainly didn't want to be in social contexts. And there was a lot of demand avoidance, didn't really want to do after school activities or any of the things that her sister would have done. And then her regulation strategies were much more so she did a lot of tree climbing. So she just goes vertically, but doesn't to the same extent. So she likes co-regulation and she'll follow me around speaking, but it didn't feel as intense in that she didn't seem to spin out of complete control if I felt any emotion within my body, which is how my eldest and my youngest they both do that. So I think then the youngest restrictive eating pattern started punching himself in the face when he was 2. Just he would have these mega meltdowns. All 3 of them, I guess, would hide when they had their mega meltdown. So I always have this funny story where with my now 11-year-old, who was about 4 at the time, we ended up calling the police because one of the times he had, she had a mega meltdown and she used to melt down and scream and she couldn't breathe when she was having a panic attack, but she wouldn't want anyone near her and she'd run and I would just give her space because I was like, I can't, I can't manage you and the other two. So, and space seemed to be what helped her. So one of the times she climbed into the dresser box and pulled all the clothes over her. And eventually the screaming subsided and I couldn't find her anywhere and she had fallen asleep.
Oh my gosh.
And because she used to like open the doors and run because she had a bit of a running pattern and stuff, we were terrified. Somehow she'd managed to get out because I would always have the door locked with her because she was a runner. So that's just one of the little examples of the
Yeah.
kind of things that happened.
Did the
And
police find her or did you find her?
no, we found her. We found her. So the police were off searching the streets for her, but we eventually found her fast asleep in the dresser box. So, and then little brother, yeah, he just had these intense meltdowns from about 2 and seemed to hate himself from very early, like that he was a bad kid, and would like punch himself in the face because he couldn't calm down.
Hmm.
And so this was all kind of happening at, and their sister was, in hospital. And then I went to hospital with her for a very long, well, for about 5, 6 months, she was hospitalized between various different services,
Wow.
both with the inability to eat at all and various suicidal episodes. And so that was really her intense burnout. And unfortunately, the advice that we got was a very around kind of supporting her, certainly didn't help much or extended the burnout. It did start the process of us starting to, seek or get diagnosed. At that stage, she was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety and depression, and she did get medication and a question over OCD. And it was suggested that we should do an ASD diagnosis, but nobody was kind of willing to do that at that time because she wasn't speaking. So at that time, she'd gone fully mute.
Okay. And this was when she was 11?
Yeah, so this is 12. She was 12 by the time she was hospitalized. This is when she was 12. So it probably started us on the path towards some of the more accurate answers, but because what we were advised to do was all sort of almost trained in, was very behaviorally focused, a lot of additional control to keep her safe, control to make her eat, control to, manage her from, running away or doing any of the dangerous things. It was all about like lockdown and control. I felt like that the burnout kind of just got worse and worse, like in that, when she came home, maybe things were better, but she definitely withdrew into her room and just didn't really talk. She hid that. And probably the one thing I had gotten was a really felt into was lots of co-regulation and slowing down and managing my own energy and just being with. And that seemed to help. But then it was also taken in the context of lots of this sort of behavioral type approaches to try and support her. And then I guess she had an ASD diagnosis when she was 14. Eventually they managed to run a process that was like a modified process because she was still fairly silent with any kind of services or medical professions. It was still quite difficult to get her to talk. She could talk to young people, but very much struggled to talk to anybody who, I guess, threatened that threat response. Then the demand avoidance and the silence was just going to be full silence. So, but they did do an ASD assessment, and it was probably when she was diagnosed as ASD, I got a whole load of literature, and PDA was one of the things I found. And I was like,
Yeah, that.
that's like how she was since she was born. Like, so I was like, that really resonated. At the same time, we had been looking for an occupational therapist and we reached out to this lovely girl who didn't have any capacity, but she kind of had heard our story and she was like, well, ethically, I can't not see you. So I'll do 2 sessions with you, but I don't have capacity to take her on right now. But she listened to sort of my story and said, okay, I would recommend you investigate PDA further. I think this fits. So that's probably where we started that investigation.
Yeah. So that was when she was 14.
Yes, 14.
Yeah. And it sounds like when you found PDA, it was kind of like an aha moment or a veil coming off of like, this all makes sense.
Yeah, it was, I mean, everything I read, I was just like, oh, that would have been handy when she was 2. Like, it
Yeah.
wasn't, there was no uncertainty. Like, if you even just the pure EDAQ, not even the in between bits, like I could just go tick, 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 tick. Like, all of it was always there. Like, the demand avoidance had been there since she was tiny, and I knew I could never push her. I had to, like, an example, when she was little and I wanted her to learn to swim because we live next to the ocean, she just wouldn't get in the pool because it was too terrifying. So I got in the pool with her in my arms for about 6 months and we watched the lesson that she was booked into. And one day she got into the lesson and then she did it forever more and she was a great swimmer after that. But like,
Yeah.
there was no way. If I had tried to force her into that lesson the first day, she wouldn't have gone. Like, there's just no way in hell it would ever happen. If I tried to force her to learn to ride a bike, it wouldn't have happened. We got the bike. I walked it and pushed it, eventually got her on and pushed her on it. Like, almost broke my back. But like, if I tried to get her onto the bike, like, she did not. And by saying this, I mean, like, I walked her and pushed her for 6 months. I'm not talking about like
Yeah.
one,
No, this
like,
is like, it's reminding me of my husband teaching my older son to ski. He spent 2 entire winters with my son between his legs, like, but not like a 3-year-old. Like, we're talking 6 and 7, and like him holding him up
yeah,
completely between his legs the entire ski season. And my son loving the dopamine, but like would not even let my husband like be 1 inch from him. Like, he had to be basically on my husband. He had back issues because of it, but it was like they just
yeah,
kept doing it until one day he was finally like, okay, I'm ready.
yeah. And that's it. And that was always our pattern. And I think somehow when she got to 8 or 9 and I had the other 2 kids, I forgot or something. And she kind of withdrew. And she had learned a whole lot of things where I'd scaffolded her so much. But I sort of went, you're 9 now. You'll be able to figure it yourself. But that wasn't correct. That wasn't right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It can be easy to think of it like developmentally, like, okay, now they're ready to do this on their own rather than like as a nervous system difference or disability, as like this is how they learn. Like, they need that nervous system and support to learn.
yeah. And what I've found now is like so one of the things that created lots of difficulty was from the moment in grade 4, which is typically what they do here, she had an iPad. She was immediately like, I want that all the time, every second of every day. And I had, read all the research outside and had gone, oh, this isn't good for brain development and we're going to have limits and we're going to have boundaries. And that was a war and a real driver for her dysregulation and mine because she would, because it was a constant battle about it, but
Mhm.
also shame on her part that she felt this strong need for it. But now, all the years later, like eventually when she was 13 or so, and it wasn't a choice, I just was like, I don't care anymore. Good luck.
Yeah.
Because, she had been so unwell and everything had gone. And yeah, I was basically, beside her all the time. Her brother was having screaming terrors in the night. Her sister, it was a very, very crazy, very intense, very difficult time where, every meal was difficult, every bite of food that went in was difficult. And so choose it really, I was just like, okay, sure, go for gold.
Yeah, that's
Have
how
your devices.
that's how it ended up with me. It wasn't a mindful decision. It was a sort of like, I can't do this anymore. Like it's gotten so
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
with just trying to get through the day and survive. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think we had a major escalation that precipitated this, where I still had some boundaries. I didn't have very many boundaries, even by the time she'd hit 13, because we'd been through the hospital and all that. But I did have, like, you know, screen timeouts where the timer would go off and she couldn't access anymore. She actually incredibly good at hacking around that system, but anyway, that's a different question. But she had a major escalation, and we had a runoff incident, and and the story. The other two kids are in the house, so I've got like, and then 5-year-old, 4.5, 5-year-old. I've then got my middle one, and I'm like, I've got to run off into the bush, and there's nobody to mind these other two, and I'm gonna hope that they're okay. And I don't know where she is, and I don't know how long this is gonna take, or whether it's gonna go to the like severe risk, like we had incidences on the edge of cliffs and all this kind of stuff that we had to manage, or whether it's going to just go to a running mode. So it was really that precipitated. I was like, you know what? Screw screen time limits.
Yeah.
Have fun.
I mean, it's like
I'm done.
at a certain point, it's like it's the least of your worries. Like
Yeah.
it's like cliff or some screen time. We're gonna go with screen time.
We gotta go with screen time. Definitely preferable to the cliff.
Yeah.
But that then became for a very long time, a constant screen time. But what I noticed, kind of separate to the whole process, was how much it regulates her. And it's a proxy for me, and an easier proxy as a teen, because I could see she's having this individuation process where she doesn't want to have me all of the time, right? It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel aligned with where she wants to be as a teenager. But what I started noticing was, like, she is absolutely brilliant at finding other neurodiverse PDAs out there in the world. And some of the things I noticed her doing, like one of the things I'd really worried about was that she would, have the screen on all night. But one of the things I noticed was her and somebody that she'd found online would put the screen on beside them and have each other sleeping. So they would have somebody co-sleep with them in the bedroom by having a screen, and they just watch each other sleep. Right.
Wow. That's
So
it.
just so
Yeah.
interesting little things where you could see that the screen had this, like when I let go and released control over the screen, I noticed how much she was using it as a co-regulation tool.
hmm Yeah.
And that was primarily its function. And that's what she leans into. She'll nearly always have music or something acting as a kind of co-regulator.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's such a good story. So when you, Aoife, learned about PDA, this was post hospitalization, correct?
yes.
And it was sort of this aha moment. Did it shift the way that you approached her a lot? Because it sounds like you had intuited so many things to support her. But I'd love to hear how it changed things for you once you learned about PDA and how it shifted your approach with the suicidal ideation and eating, or if it did.
Oh, it definitely did. But I think the initially finding it, more than straight away changing the approach, it just gave me a sense of, I guess, an aha moment or a real light bulb of finally starting to try and fit together, understand the component pieces. Because up until that point in time, and I think it actually took a good bit of processing to figure that out, because at that time it just felt, it was like, there's anxiety over here, there's OCD over here, there's eating disorder over here, there's, the suicidal stuff, there's the continuous self-harm, which was extreme. I've yet to hear of anybody else who has self-harm in the sort of range that my daughter
Oh,
had self-harm. And I was like, and they all looked like these totally unrelated, or not unrelated, but like, and then the ADHD was sort of quite different to the ASD and how you manage those. And there was no linking thread that made sense. And I think it was, and the first thing that PDA gave me was this sort of linking thread or way of understanding the behavior that was across a whole range of facets. And it was probably then later when and then I think probably the next thing that PDA gave me was a way of understanding the restricted eating that wasn't through this very behavioral lens, right? And just a way of sort of noticing where the advice or the recommendations I'd been given weren't serving me, and where, and I was so frightened because she had become so medically compromised in her body from not eating that it was very, very difficult to try and undo some of that work. But that was probably the first thing that PDA gave me, was this logic to understand and link together, because we had, the non-24-hour sleep cycle. So we had the not sleeping, we had the safety, we had toileting with a lot of sort of constipation and different things, and we had, the eating. So we had all these pieces that looked separate, and you're trying to do different things for them. And PDA gave me this frame to go, maybe they're all linked. And it sort of also made sense of the picture of what I had always understood about my daughter intuitively was that it was like she was primed, she came into the world not able to cope with the world, like primed to dysregulation rather than to regulation. And that was something that PDA sort of helped me to understand. So I'd say when I first found out about PDA, it just made sense. And then the initial stuff I found was all very negative and kind of scary, but at least it gave me this lens to sort of maybe imagine there were different reasons. It was probably later when I found you that I started to go, oh, there's actually some positive things I might be able to do about this. Because up until that point, I'd found, other than probably the very first thing was peeling back demands. But at that point, I mean, we had dropped all demands, because there was no way, like if somebody is hiding under the covers in their room staring at the wall, there's no demands.
yeah. Like what
There
demands
was no
totally.
but there was a bit of a shift, I think, when we initially found it around, bringing down questions, which is definitely something I was doing a lot of questioning, because I was trying to get action or movement from somebody who was in their turtle shell.
Yeah. You want
so yeah, I wanted to, it's like, but we have to, go and get a blood because we don't know how your body's going, or we have to get this and that. So there was a lot of questions of her, even though she was very silent and very much in herself. So that probably the first thing was dropping the questions. That was probably the very first change. And I could feel, oh, that feels just a little bit less agitation. And something in my energy maybe shifted a little bit. And I could feel as we were shifting, there was just a small bit of improvement. And I don't know that we were actually actively doing anything. I just felt like how I understood what was going on with her was changing. And I was maybe not pushing so hard. Let's go to the therapist. Let's try and do a day at school. So the push just eased off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And where I've been, going, she's not, everything's terrible. Like she needs something. And I guess because in that early years, I had leaned so heavily into like dopamine, the friends as an alternative regulation tool, dopamine, sensory intense, and special interests, and like facilitating and scaffolding the special interest. When the special interest disappears, the withdrawal happened, and we don't want friends most of the time. We can't cope with them, and the sensory intents had dropped entirely and she was faint when she was standing up. But, so all of these tools that had served me when she was little, there wasn't, she was in full burnout. They weren't going to work. And I didn't have another palette of tools, whereas I think seeing through the PDA lens gave me, there's these other tools. And I think because I had always leaned so much into sort of the dopamine, sensory intents and all of that type of stuff with her, when everything was wrong, I kept trying to find that for her, right? So I would bring her things, or I would be like,
let's do
"Come
that.
on, let's get you out and you'll feel a bit better." And that wasn't gonna work. So, and I think then when I found you and started to find some actual concrete accommodation ideas, that started to work. And I think one of the first things I did from you was that was probably one of the most helpful things I came across, and has been really helpful with all of my kids, was that you did a communication course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was a communication course that said, if in doubt, stop talking. And it was incredible. The level of dysregulation with me went down overnight from just, I'd walk into a room, I would drop her food, not say a word unless she spoke to me, and I just stopped talking. That was like my first intention, like probably next after the demands, that was my next sort of action. And then obviously there was lots of recommendations around that, around noticing, that even though verbally she's very gifted when the words came out, maybe she's not processing, or like the language processing could be different, and noticing that, and just when I did have to say something, just giving a lot of time and having the one sentence, all of these things, I started to see a shift in the patterns between us. And whereas before it had very much been like a very push pull, I was the person who was the easiest to equalize against. Like when she first came out of hospital, she used to stab me with a fork when she had to eat her meal. And if I came near her, she'd just scream at me. So, because I really love my child, and because I knew she was so unwell, like anything that was directed at me, she was directing 50-fold more at herself, and I could see that. So it didn't really, the equalizing towards me sometimes upset me, but it mostly didn't really bother me, because I could see that what she was directing at herself was exponentially larger. And when you see your child in that much trouble, it's not hard to, but I saw that start to come down. So that sort of equalizing towards me was like, oh, and just the basic fight, like the only interactions we were having for a very long time were usually these sort of, I'd walk into the room and she'd go scream, yeah. Whereas
what? Sorry, I missed
she'd
it.
scream, fuck off, get out. Like that was, that was the range of our conversation. Whereas that really shifted when I stopped talking so much and just stopped talking, gave her the autonomy to start conversations if she wished. So that was probably that first PDA approach piece that was really helpful. And then I did your paradigm shift program, and I found lots of tools to add to my toolkit. And definitely the ones that I found most effective for her are the dopamine. Dopamine's always a really big one for her, and that has continued to be. But the autonomy, absolutely crucial.
Mm-hmm.
If I can in any way provide autonomy and not put a control box around things, and that autonomy is a lot more extreme than most parents provide for their teens, which feels really counterintuitive and was very difficult to do because she had been so unwell. So there was this whole perception by all kinds of services that we would put a control box around her. But the day that I said that, I went, no, this is just making it worse, and took the box away. And, which meant that, her first forays back into the world, where she was like, I'm going to go out and meet a friend at midnight, so there's these kinds of things that were really scary and difficult. I mean, fortunately, we live in a little town and it's very safe, but her deciding to go out and meet a friend at midnight and stay until 2 in the morning, after not wanting to leave the house was not an easy transition. And that's just an example of
Yeah.
places where, but when I could give her the autonomy and then go, you know what? I'm just so anxious. It's not you I worry about, it's other people I worry about. Can you just send me a text? And what time, like, can you give me an expectation of when you might come home? But like, rather than being like, you must be back at this time,
Yeah.
or no, you can't. Like, it's only 6 months since I've been chasing you to cliff edges. You can't go ahead of it.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to give somebody autonomy and freedom to step back into life in a way that they choose when you've been through. And yet I could see as I started like little, and that's probably more extreme. We had gotten further along our journey by the time she decided she actually wanted to leave the house, but that's just an example of how she wanted to leave the house initially. But like, yeah, getting that, but starting to let go and allow her to, that autonomy was so critical. And then that probably was the most important accommodation, along with the language and communication was very critical
Yeah.
too.
So how would you say she's doing now? Can you tell me from like when she was hospitalized to now?
Worlds apart in terms of her general well-being. So now she is in school typically about 2 to 3 days a week. She goes to like a school that's particularly accommodating and flexible. It's called flexible learning environment, but that didn't seem like a possibility at all. And interestingly, speaking about the autonomy accommodation, it was the day that I completely let go in my soul without saying a word to her that she would ever return to school, that she turned around to me and said, Mom, I want to go back to school. So
Yes.
that's an example.
It's such an energetic shift, right? Like that's when I said to my son after in my soul, I had been like, he may never go back to school. He may never go to school. This might never work. And I asked him from that place of like, you never have to go to school. Would you like to try this private school though? And he was like, yes. But it was like, it was, I feel, only because I had truly radically accepted that he might not and that that would be okay. It's like he
Yeah.
felt or perceived that true autonomy in the decision. And you're
And this is the interesting thing for me. It was like this whole extra step because I had not opened my mouth. I had just kind of I'd been doing a lot of work kind of in myself. And she had been enrolled in this school forever and we hadn't removed the enrollment because she hadn't asked us to, but just wasn't really making it. And I could see, like, as we had released stuff, I could see, and it was really helpful doing work with you to look for the micro indicators because I could see these concentric circles, right? So she, wasn't wanting to go to school, but she was, coming out of her room and walking to the kitchen when there were people present, as opposed to never leaving her room. She was starting to occasionally say something to somebody who's in the room, or she might pick up stuff that, was on the table and have a look at it briefly and then go back to her room. But like I started to notice these concentric circles that were happening. And as I noticed that and things started to release, I started to notice what she was learning by herself in her room. And so with her laptop, as she started to relax and things were getting better, she had decided to teach herself Hebrew on Duolingo for, I'm not sure precisely why, or, she, she started, which was one of the lovely accommodations which I had tried, which was strewing. And I had decided, okay, I'm going to do some work on myself and I'm going to take a break and I'm going to paint a little bit every day. And then, behold, she's picked up her paintbrushes because she had always loved art and it had been a really regulating thing for her. And she's just amazing, an incredible artist. But she had, said, I don't draw anymore
Yeah.
from about the age of 12. And then, she picked up her art materials and started drawing again, and beautiful drawings, and books started arriving in the mail that she had ordered, and all of this. And I was like, you know what, she's bright. If she's not in her survival brain, if she's not just in her amygdala, she'll learn plenty. She doesn't need to go to school. So that was kind of where I was going, and I sort of arrived there. And the next morning she said, Mom, I'm going back to school.
It's like it's so exactly the paradox that seems to happen over and over again when we finally accept they like persist,
Yeah.
you know?
And that's what I've found in my journey. As much as the proactive actions have helped, the biggest shifts have happened because of energy changes that I can't quite describe, that sort of happen as you peel back the layers of acceptance in yourself.
Hmm.
And I can't pinpoint that very well, but I can just say that that's been my experience, that it's the act of accepting completely how things are, and not trying to control the outcome, just trying to, input what you can as best you can, and then
Yeah.
allowing it roll has been kind of my experience of where we've seen the real positive shifts.
Yeah. I love that. Before we wrap up, I'd love to talk about the fact that through this process, you realized your own PDA neurotype.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
Was there a single moment where you were like, oh my gosh, that's exactly like me? Or was it a series of sort of unfolding awareness? What was it like for you? And can you tell me about that?
I think it was an unfolding awareness, and it was through the journey of, investigating my own, or my daughter's PDA. And I guess it was through the paradigm shift program. I was doing the paradigm shift program, and there was some other people in the paradigm shift program who were PDA. And one of the things I noticed was there was one or two people who were PDA who were quite verbal in the community, and they were verbal like during sessions, and they would say things that I was absolutely feeling. I was like, that's really similar. And then another thing that I'd always noticed, so prior to sort of working into this space, I'd found an alternative group that supported neurodiverse presentations of eating disorders that didn't really respond to what the recommended best practice in the medical sphere, which is a very behavioral type approach and exposure driven type approach. And in the practice that they do is they have some insiders or some people with eating disorders who've gone through the experience and kind of come through the other side, or are still sort of in recovery, and they'll talk about what the internal experience of an eating disorder felt. And one of the things I noticed, while I do not have an eating disorder, was listening to this. I was like, oh, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. Like I could really associate with the feelings, not of the parents in the community, but the insiders with the eating disorders and their descriptions of the things that were difficult for them in their childhood or in their journey. And because I had never had anything as significant as my daughter, I was like, well, I've gotten through life somehow. Um, didn't initially come up for me. And the other interesting thing, and I'd say many PDAs will be able to speak to this, because PDA is the nervous system. You respond and you don't know why you respond that way, right? And then you come up with a backstory about why it was okay that you responded that way. And you've so many layers of defensiveness that it's actually defensiveness and shutdown, depending where you go, which I have a bit of both, that it's really hard to understand what's going on and why. And it was only really through the process of seeing other people who were PDA describing how they felt about things. And I was like, that's me. Oh, that's me again. You're
Yeah.
just describing what's going through my head. And then I started thinking back on the patterns of my life and going, yeah, that's really similar. And also seeing like My eldest daughter, her presentation, she's is very strongly PDA and very quite an internalized presentation. Or it's like her presentation is internal and external in opposite directions to me. So it was not easy for me to see the alignment, if that makes sense. Whereas when I started to hear about other kids, I was like, oh, I did that. I did that. I did that. And I think Kendall did a story where she talked, and I was like, oh, yeah, yes,
Yeah.
tick, tick,
Yeah.
tick, tick. And I think that was really the process of understanding that I am PDA, and that's kind of in such a pattern, or it's such a challenge in my own life in trying to navigate the world. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it, how it played out for me, or
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. So I'd love to, if you're open to it, just, you referenced Kendall. So Kendall is one of our coaches, and she, just for people listening, and she is a PDA autistic woman with a more internalized expression. So one of the things she talked about was like her childhood and how her basic needs also played out, or where she had burnouts. Because I think the fluctuating nature of like going through periods where maybe things are smooth or you're more accommodated naturally by your environment, and then this hitting of a wall or going into burnout or having these basic needs struggles that are often looked at medically apart from the neurodivergence. So I'm wondering if like that has been your story at all.
yes, yes. So I would say for me, when I was a young child, I would say I was naturally very accommodated by my mother, without not intentionally. My mom, neurotype uncertain, but is probably the most, with the exception of my children, possibly my husband, is probably the most demand avoiding person I have ever met. But she did like, one of the things that she said was really important in her life was that she did a mindfulness course when she was young, and that had really given her this sense that she could never control anyone else in the world, and she would never try, but she would just do her own thing. So my mum was a very confusing person for my father, because she would say yes to everything and just do exactly what she had planned to do anyway. She's an automatic yes, and absolutely nobody could ever direct her in any direction other than the direction she was going to walk in herself. But she also gave her children an incredible amount of autonomy, because she couldn't envisage a world where you would try to, like, she hated it if anybody tried to control what she was doing, and she certainly didn't plan on doing that for her children. And we had a very different childhood in some ways. Like, I know people would often tell stories, like my dad would always say, when you're 2 and 3, you used to get all the clothes and pull them out of the cupboard and chuck them on the floor. And I'd say to your mom, like, why are you letting her do that? Now you've got to clean them all up. And she's like, well, and I would put them all on, put different tops and different bottoms on. And my mom would go, well, how's she going to know what she's going to want to wear if she doesn't chuck them on the floor? And there's lots of stories like this that go around in our house. Like, I also think my mum didn't find it odd, like that I would have these massive screaming meltdowns, and I had a place in the garage that I went and hid when I was having a massive screaming meltdown. It was my spot where I would scream and howl at the universe, because about once a week my mum would walk around the house crying for about a day. And that was just her process, and she called it the SADS. And sure, everybody got the SADS, and that's fine. you
Yeah.
know, we all get the
Everybody
SADS.
says, okay.
It's okay, this is SADS. And I know my uncle had a favorite story where he was like, we'd walk in the door and I'd just like drop stuff on the floor, and he'd be like, what are you doing? I'd be like, oh, it's okay. Stuff gets picked up in this house. So my mom just, picked it up, didn't worry about it. So she never really made any of it feel wrong or different. And she, like, I know other people would often talk, because if she had people over, I would be sitting up at the table. I would be probably talking more than anyone else. And when I look back at videos of myself, my mum and dad had to be watching me. following me and paying attention to me all the time. So I definitely needed that co-regulation piece. But school was absolutely miserable. I can't describe how miserable it felt in my body to be in a school environment, and I felt just wrong, like I was wrong, that I just didn't fit.
Did you feel like when you talk about in your body, was it like disassociation, like chest pain, tunnel vision? Like what kind of, do you remember? Or does it just feel like just this
I
wrong?
think more than anything, it feels in my stomach like I was just wrong. Like I couldn't do things the way the other kids would. I was very disliked. I think probably my play was a bit controlling, so I didn't really have friends. When like I think I had quite a fawn response. Not that I remember having a fawn response, but I know later I was friends with some of the boys who'd been in my class, which that actually turned out was easier to be friends with them than the girls. When I was in high school, and they had some stories that were very fawn response. So I think I just put my head down, but I just remember feeling intensely uncomfortable, like feeling maybe like often I would have like odd socks going in because my mum was not very organized and I certainly wouldn't figure it out, you know, like thing I would feel very like I could never find anything. Other kids seemed to know where their pens were and know where things were. So I just felt sort of out of place and wrong is all I can really describe it as. And it was, I felt it in my tummy. And I would say I always seem to get sick a lot. So I think when I was in primary, I don't remember as much of it. And I think there was a particular point in time where I'd say I internalized my threat response, if that's possible to say. So I definitely think I equalized a lot against my younger sister. I didn't understand it or recognize it at the time, but I now know from some of the stories she's told me that that was quite hard for her. And like from things, yeah, without me sort of being aware that that's what I was doing. And I know when I was 12, I used to see red. So I would just not actually see red, but like I would just have that hair trigger response, be in full flight and just go. And I had no idea why. And I remember when I was 12, one time I hit her so hard I could see my handprint on her body.
Hmm.
And something clicked in my head and I was like, never again. That's never happening again. Never do. Because it felt so at odds with my heart space, with who I thought I was versus that just exploded on other people, right? And I think at that point, and I think also I so hated that how lonely and how disliked I was in primary school. I felt like I've got to be different somehow. I've got to find a way of being different. So I think after that, going into high school, I would go through these bouts of mini burnout and things that I started to have trouble with. I think I had quite restrictive eating patterns without it being a reduction in eating, in that I found chewing regulating, but I remember one time we went on holidays and they didn't have porridge and I had porridge every single morning and I had a full on blown panic attack because I could not get porridge. And I was about 18 at this stage, right? I was like, we were in Barcelona, I was with university, and I was like, I can't cope because there is no porridge.
Yeah.
And then coming out of the bathroom from having this full on panic attack, then managed to find somewhere that had muesli with yogurt and I could cope, right? And lunch had to be a baked potato. It had to include certain things at different stages, but it was very regimented in my head what I could eat at certain times. And outside that, it didn't matter that much, but it was just, I had these kind of regimented patterns. I had to eat particular things. I would have problems with kind of cycles of diarrhea and then constipation, diarrhea, constipation. So later I was kind of diagnosed with, it's called an IBS, but like probably was more that pattern of fight, freeze, fight, freeze, fight, freeze, I think, in retrospect. I had terrible trouble sleeping and always had. So I would have called myself as a like 5-year-old an insomniac. I would have said I was an insomniac. I just couldn't sleep and I would have terrible trouble going to sleep, terrible trouble staying asleep. And I know when I was 16, my mum used to meditate with me. So she would do like feel your body to help me try and go to sleep. That was what we used to do. And I think when I was about 16, I came up with like a kind of mantra where I would just say, just let go, just let go. So I was trying to let go of control and that helped a little bit. But I really only learned to sleep or was able to sleep when I married my husband and had somebody to co-sleep with me. That's like when I was able to sleep again, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, my husband always joked, he's like, would you have married me if you hadn't discovered it was so nice to sleep?
Yeah, it's a nice perk when you get married and you can sleep again or for the first time.
Yeah. So that was probably the one that I had a lot of trouble with. And probably in those teen years, I had gone in one way, I found my neurokin. So I had this positive experience, but I also had, and in Ireland, when you go to high school, you get to choose your subjects. So I had a bit more autonomy around what I was doing in school, which was helpful. But I also found the demands hard and had started like more freezing down when I went into a panic response, except apparently when I got drunk. So apparently as a teenager, as an older teenager, when I started to drink, I would just cry. I would disappear under a cover and cry. So I was like, I can't have a drink like other people do because that thing that I've shut, like that I go into this shut down so it doesn't come out, it comes out.
Yeah, yeah. When you relax a little, there it
If you
is.
relax a little bit, you're gonna see it. So that's just a funny thing. But yeah, and I think I probably from that, well, from 12 on, I would have had these patterns of suicidal ideation, which just seemed part of my life from that point forward. Definitely burnout phases where I just couldn't get up and go to school. And my mum would just be like, okay, you can't go to school today, that's fine. And then a day or two later, I would get up because I would be very, very anxious that I wasn't going to school, but I just would have these burnouts. I would I lost my voice a lot. My voice would just go missing. If the stress level got a bit high, my voice would just go and I thought it was sore throat or I don't know what, but I just would cease to be able to speak for a day or two.
Yeah.
And the other one I probably had a lot of was, so I had a period of fainting and I definitely had a burnout when I was about 16. There's a thing they do in Ireland where you in school you learn Gaelic, and my parents had decided to send me to a camp where you go and immerse yourself in Gaelic to sort of help yourself learn. And apparently, to all intensive purposes, I was really pleasant when I was there. I was made the head of a house. I looked absolutely fine. But 6 months later, I could not remember being there. I had no memory of any single person who was in any of the photos. And that was probably when that cycle of fainting started. So
Yeah.
it was just this oddity, this kind of thing that happened. But I was looking back at photos and they were like, no, they're your friends. I was like, I don't even know who these people are. I don't recognize anything. I was only 6 months later and I remember that kind of frightened me going,
Yeah.
how did I have this, period, but I have no memory of it. But it did coincide with this kind of pattern of fainting. And I think I must have been in a bit of a burnout of sorts
Yeah.
at that time. I did, and when I was 16, I left school and went to a dance school. So dance had been my primary regulation tool, special interest from when I was about 8 or 9. And that's what I did. I came home and I danced and I danced and I danced and I danced and it just music, movement, it was very regulating for me. But when I was about 16, I was like, nah, can't do school anymore. I'm going to go and dance instead. But then going and dancing, the dancing became in demand. And there wasn't a lot of, I had to do a whole load of forms that I wasn't that into.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't think I have the strength to be a dancer. And I then chose to go back to school. And it would sort of worked well for me because I had picked at that point I could pick exactly what subjects I wanted to do because it was the higher end of school. And I had this and I also sort of learned ways to accommodate myself in that when I went back to school, I'm going to go and I want to do something practical with my life. So I'm going to try to do well in school. But it's great if I don't, because if I don't, I'm going to go traveling. So I had this dichotomy in my head so that it didn't feel like pressure because I actually really wanted to go traveling. So I'd sort of found these little tricks I could use in my own head to allow me to learn without being too stressed out. And I'd also done a course that my mum had sent me to that helped me to learn, because I was very conscious that I couldn't learn things the way other people did. It was just different the way I needed to learn. But I sort of found my own way of learning things. And then once I did that, I did very well, but I needed to find that my own path that wasn't the way other people learned. It was just different.
Thank you so much for telling us about your experience with PDA. I know that many families listening are going to get so much out of that. Aoife, if you could leave parents with one primary piece of advice, either from the perspective of a PDA or yourself, or from your hard-earned wisdom with your 3 kids, what would it be?
I think there's probably just 2 main things I would say. One for as a parent and one as a PDA. As a parent, I would say the thing that I have found the most effective and is the hardest thing to invest time in when you feel like your world is falling apart and there's not enough space for you because your children need you, is the most effective thing I've done is investing time in my own self journey towards accepting my life and my constraints, and in each layer of accepting my children as they are and accepting PDA as it is, that's probably given me the most benefit, or I can see the most improvement in my kids, which each little shift within myself, I can see improvement flow in my kids, even with my son now being able to tell me how he feels rather than punching himself in the face, right? He'll now say, I'm so worried, Mom, and we'll talk. But like these little energetic shifts that have opened me to be able to fully hear without panicking about what they're doing. Like, so rather than panicking when your son hits himself in the face and trying to stop it, but more doing the work in myself to be open and curious and available, that's actually been the most effective thing. So that's probably what I'd leave parents with. And then I think the other piece I'd say, just as a PDAer, is my own pattern with my mother intensely confused me. I felt like I was controlling and I didn't like the person I was with her, but I did really, really love her for that. And she's always been my safe person. So I wanted to leave that with parents, that even if it doesn't feel like it, your PDA child really loves you and they're probably as confused as you are by their behavior.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's going to be so helpful for parents to hear. Well, thank you so much, Aoife. This was such an awesome conversation, and I so appreciate all of your time and vulnerability.
Thanks for listening, and everybody else's journey is traveling well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.